Hello everyone. Today we're excavating the trail ruins. The first portion of the video is a combination of explanations, prep work, and a montage of the digging phase. The second portion, we will discuss our findings and analyze them in terms of Minecraft and the two other structures we have already uncovered. Please enjoy. Placing the bed there was my first mistake because I eventually ended up mining out this entire section, and a lot of deforestation took place for the building of the lab and the crafting of the chests. With the site identified, we will eventually give it a name, but there's a lot of prep work that goes into an archaeological unit, although ours is slightly different since we're playing a game. What is beneficial is that we don't require government funds for this excavation, and after some quick on-camera creative menu mining, we can discuss what a site is compared to a unit. A site is an overarching area that is broken up into units. A unit, initially, is 1 meter by 1 meter built with string and nails, but it can expand as you wish it to. Little triangles on the corners serve as support to prevent the front nails from caving in should the terrain give way. The purpose of a unit is to methodologically keep track of your findings so they are preserved within the context of the site, otherwise they are useless. A floor is a form of differentiation within a unit. They're usually between 10 to 20 centimeters thick, or they'll follow natural soil layers, or in the case of the site I worked, they can be literal plaster floors, although disintegrated. Additionally, when out in the field, you should have clear plastic bags with cards to properly label your findings before transporting them to the lab to clean them. However, we don't exactly have a lab. This is what our site looks like now, and this is why I study buildings instead of building them. We have a storage area with chests and shelves, which are slightly more for decoration. Here's the cleaning station, a useless few blocks since you can't clean items in Minecraft. These are drying racks. Are we going to use them? Not likely, but they improve the atmosphere. As you're digging, you're not going to collect everything you find. A lot of what we find is sort of useless, like rocks and dirt, but not entirely useless, as it can become backfill. Here's our poor excuse for a sifter. You'd sift every bucket of material that you dig out to hopefully find something of value. Earlier, I mentioned how we don't need government funds. Some sites in real life don't have enough money to pay for the maintenance that goes into keeping sites open and preserved, so they practice backfilling. This means that the already sifted material is thrown back onto the ruin to protect it. You don't have to sift that dirt again, but you do have to dig it out at the beginning of each archaeological phase and place it back at the end. Specifically, in regard to pottery sherds, and yes, sherd is the correct term, shard refers to metal or glass, and sherd is for ceramics. You don't need to keep pieces of ceramic that are smaller than a quarter unless diagnostic elements exist. If you ever see someone with a tattooed circle about the size of an American quarter, they're most likely an archaeologist or simply part of a cult, but that could be the same thing. Coal is your secret lover. You can use it to carbon date the floor or layer in which you are digging to know the time frame of when the structure was built, or to know the time frame of when people were there. Our goal is to preserve the ruin while removing other blocks like gravel and dirt. If you've ever visited a site and you still see trees and other vegetation covering the ruins, that's because removing them may cause some collapse, and collapse is no bueno. Now, let's get digging. Now that you've seen this magnificent ruin, let's talk about it. The Trail Ruin is a small community of 10 structures and one extended pathway, branching from east to west. As the sun rises and falls, so does the pathway. The pathway is at its highest during noon and lowest during dawn and dusk. Taking into consideration the particular resemblance of the tower, this ruin will be called Sundial. Despite the possibility of mere coincidence, this shows that the ancient people of this ruin possessed a concept of time and the rotation of the sun and moon. The path is primarily composed of cobblestone, stone bricks, and cracked stone bricks, an abundant resource derived from overworld stone. Ignore the one mud brick in the middle. I have no thoughts on it. The additional predominant materials used in the construction are bricks, terracotta, both colored and patterned, and variants of mud. Terracotta, by far, is the most conspicuous, with its bright flaunting tones and intricate glazed details. Both bricks and terracotta are formed from clay, which can be gathered from lush caves or routinely from rivers and surface-level bodies of water. A river runs straight by this ruin, and perhaps it existed during the time of the ancient residents. Water is needed to transform dirt into mud, which when combined with wheat forms packed mud. Packed mud can then be crafted to form mud bricks. When smelted, clay becomes brick. Clay bricks can be crafted into a brick block. Clay can be crafted into a clay block. When smelted, clay blocks become terracotta, which can be dyed. Dyed terracotta can be smelted again in order to form their glazed and decorated variant. Not only were the ancient residents of Sundial resourceful in collecting material, but foolhardy in terms of experimenting and innovating. We encountered 2 types of terracotta: dyed terracotta and glazed terracotta. Of the dyed variety, we found red, orange, yellow, blue, cyan, light gray, and white. Of the glazed variety, we found light blue glazed, yellow glazed, and light gray glazed. It's evident that the ancient residents of Sundial had easy access to a variety of flowers and biomes, such as, but not limited to, the flower forest, plains, taiga, savanna, sunflower plains, and various forest variants. The most frequently used colors are red, white, and blue. As seen in Mayan structures, which were formerly painted and predominantly the color red, then white or cream, other colors included what is deemed Mayan blue, yellow, and black. Some scholars say the red was to serve as a stark contrast to the prevalent green of the surrounding jungles and forests. Red is akin to human blood, yellow to the sun, and blue to the sky of day and water. In Mayan languages, green and blue were symbolized by the same glyph. They both were associated with the idea of life, with blue giving birth to the life of the day and green giving birth to plants like maize and sustenance. I mentioned in my last video how the trial chambers took inspiration from Mesoamerican architecture. I wouldn't put it past the creators to have extended that aspect onto more than one feature of the game, as there is quite a lot to admire about those cultures. An additional link between the river and dyes can be found within an enlightening artifact we scrounged from the suspicious gravel: glass panes. Glass panes are crafted from glass, which are collected from a furnace after smelting sand collected from a river. We found 2 red panes, 3 yellow panes, 2 light blue panes, 1 blue pane, 2 purple panes, 1 magenta pane, and 1 pink pane. It is unclear as to if these panes were installed within the structures and the ancient residents had windows, because they were found amongst the rubble and not in their original positions. However, I believe it is safe to assume that they were used and were placed on an east to west basis, continuing with the recurring theme of the importance of the sun. On a side note, that we will return to later, glass and its variants can be traded with villagers. We found 4 different colors still in dye form: 1 orange, 4 yellow, 4 blue, and 1 white. We also found candles: 2 red, 3 green, 3 purple, and 2 brown. This further insinuates how well-traveled these people were. Green dye can only be acquired from a cactus, which is found in the desert or the Badlands, which is my absolute favorite biome, so obviously I had to see them in real life. And, if we're being technical, you can also acquire a cactus from the hidden basement of igloos. Brown dye is only made from cocoa beans that are limited to the jungle or sparse jungle biomes, which, by the way, best color ever. Furthermore, the candles not only give us a few new colors, but also a concept of fire. It's worth noting that the structure is entirely fireproof. There are few wooden elements, besides some of the workbenches and perhaps a few of the artifacts. Nothing is flammable. The lack of wood is also seen in our previously discussed structures, such as the ancient city and trial chamber. The lack of wood renders the candles a completely foolproof source of light and warmth. It's interesting why torches were not used, as they're much cheaper and easier to make than candles. It also begs the question of if the candles and the lack of flammable material have a correlation. One thing that offers guidance is the burned pottery sherd, of which we only found one amongst the wreckage. It's an uncomplicated carving, simply depicting fire. Yet depictions of fire can go more than one way when interpreted. Fires represent campfires and hearths, often sacred to the community they are housed within. They can be associated with rituals or used as a tool for cooking or smithing, and they can also be associated with warfare and destruction. My initial thought was something sinister, like a blazing fire, and the residents learned that wood was not a safe construction instrument due to its burning weakness. It fits the non-combustible structures that we are left with. Whatever the reasoning, it's something more culturally ingrained rather than mystical, as the entirety of the trail ruin appears to tilt more towards everyday life rather than something of great proportions like the ancient city or trial chambers. The pottery sherds as a whole seem to lack functional features, despite the ability to be crafted into pots. They feel more emotional and symbolic than other things we encounter within the game. Let's discuss the other sherds we uncovered. The heart sherd is a clear and universally readable symbol. It offers affection and kinship, or the idea that something is emotionally valued rather than materially. This makes me lean heavily towards Sundial being a ruin that was once full of tangible concepts of family and social bonds. We found 3 heart sherds. The danger sherd resembles a creeper face, and insinuates that the ancient resident recognized creepers as a threat enough to symbolize it culturally. We also see this in the brick and glazed terracotta altar off the eastern path. This sherd perhaps served as a warning or cautionary storytelling for descendants. We found 1 danger sherd. The howl sherd depicts a wolf, and it is one of the strongest indicators for domestication within this trail ruins culture. Wolves, in Minecraft, are used as protectors and companions by players. The symbolism is not subtle on the ideas of loyalty or partnership between humans and animals. We found 3 howl sherds, each potentially depicting a different animal. The friend sherd is a carving of a figure comparable to a villager. This is important because it shows that the ancient residents were not villagers, but friends of them. It is an explicit symbol of social interactions between our mysterious ancient residents and a concurrent species that have retained their existence. It alludes to the notions of trade and alliance between the two peoples. We also find 4 emeralds from the suspicious gravel, which further suggests trade between the 2 species. Of the other ores, we encountered 1 gold nugget and an abundance of copper. However, because the copper was discovered in an unworked ore state, it is rendered useless. Perhaps the ancient residents learned from the villagers before branching off to form their own civilizations. We found 2 friend sherds. The sheaf sherd represents wheat or a variety of bundled crops. From an archaeological standpoint, this is an immense finding because agriculture is a huge indicator of settlement and stability. Simply put, this community was here to stay. A sheaf symbol points to harvest, food production, and cyclical agricultural prosperity. In relation to this, amongst the artifacts we found, 3 wooden hoes, which can be used for gardening and farming, 3 wheat, which can be used to make bread or feed and breed livestock, such as cows and sheep, 1 beetroot seed, which can be used to create red dye or crafted into soup, and 4 wheat seeds, which can be used to grow wheat or feed and breed chickens. We also came across 2 leads suggesting that some sort of animal was being led somewhere. Yet, besides the howl sherd that portrays a wolf and the impression of domestication, there is nothing to explicitly state that farm animals were present. We found 1 sheaf sherd. Last but not least is the heartbreak sherd, which feels the most sentimental and expressive. A broken heart implies emotions of grief, betrayal, and resentment. It is curious to find something illustrating emotional suffering. Pairing this with heart, it proposes that these people experienced both connection and loss and were able to convey that artistically. We found 2 heartbreak sherds. The repetition of some of the sherds feels like cultural emphasis and positively accentuates just how deep the history of this society goes. Before we pick apart the structures themselves, we have a few more artifacts to discuss. Armor trims. We found 3 out of the possible 4. Firstly, we found 4 Wayfinder armor trims. Upon hearing this, I immediately thought of a quote I learned at a backpacking camp I used to attend. Not all those who wander are lost. It's unambiguous. The Wayfinder can never get lost because they're constantly finding their own way. They never strayed from the path, they're simply busy creating their own. Depth aside, under the assumption that this civilization had soldiers or a guard of sorts, the one bearing the Wayfinder armor trim would most likely be the navigator, offering directional and orientational guidance. This trim belonged to an explorer or a nomad, an adventurer constantly on the move. We found 3 host armor trims. It's kind of silly, but my first thought when I hear the word host is parasite, but maybe that just says something cynical about me. Returning to our archaeological framework, this can be connected back to the idea of a hearth or a dwelling. The host armor trim belonged to someone who was an anchoring presence, most likely not just out in the field. This person was presumably a defender, contrasting the movement of the Wayfinder. Lastly, we discovered 4 razor armor trims. The immediate impression is the word raise within the name. It implies that this person literally rose up, ascending to great heights, whether that be physical or societal, as in through the ranks. This trim most likely belonged to someone with great ambition who was strong enough to raise not just themselves, but the community. We found one music disc, Relic. It's a fun little beat. I consider a disc like this to be advanced technology. The ability to capture sound, especially the makings of a song, into a compact device is sophisticated, to say the least. Similarly to the ancient city, we find a disc, but no machine to activate it. It serves as another method of preservation and shows that this ancient civilization had a concept of music. The remaining artifact that we have is string. The item has too many possible origins and uses that disallow it from having a clear artifact identity. Due to its refusal to be culturally stable, I deem it as undetermined or a miscellaneous find until a spot for this puzzle piece reveals itself. Since we have discussed all the artifacts, let us return to the buildings themselves. There are 12 units. Structure A is the tower, Structure B houses the crafting table, Structure C and D house looms, Structure E houses a grindstone, Structure F houses a smithing table, furnace, and blast furnace, Structure G houses a cartography table, Structure H is undetermined, Structure I is an altar, Structure J is unknown, K is the eastern path, while L is the western path. I have organized each into 3 types of construction. The first category, which the majority fall victim to, are structures concocted with terracotta and mud. B, C, D, E, F, and J all belong to this category. The second class are structures built with terracotta and brick. A and I fall into this category. The third and last only houses one structure, H, which is constructed entirely out of terracotta. The next logical step would be to figure out if the buildings were color-coded on purpose. Typically, when this is the case, as we saw with the deep slate tiles surrounding the bath and pool in the ancient city, functions would be synonymous. However, besides the corresponding decorations, the workbenches are truly the only difference. No matter, interpretations can still be made. Building F houses a smithing table, revealing that knowledge of applying armor trims existed. They probably used emeralds for the trim, but that is inconclusive, albeit emerald being the only true ore we unearthed. It also has a similar appearance to villager blacksmiths with the bars and presumably a place for lava. We also find stacked smooth stone slabs, which can be used to craft armor stands. F is unusual because it has 3 workstations within, instead of the typical 1 station. Building E has a grindstone, meaning they certainly knew how to repair their armor and may have had some encounter with enchanting. Evidently, amongst all the buildings, roof collapse is a reoccurring theme, but that's also a reoccurring theme amongst most ruins. It appears as though Building B was unceremoniously cut short. With the ladders in the interior, there could have been potential roof access. In regard to Building H, I genuinely have no thoughts, so let me know yours. I mentioned coal earlier, and although we are unable to carbon date it, I did write down the Y levels in which it was found. The base of sundial is Y51, and its highest point is Y73. Coal was found at Y51, 52, 53, 54, 58, 59, 60, 61, 63, 64, 66, 78, and 81. We don't need the coal to know that the structure is old, perhaps older than the ancient city and trial chamber. The ancient city felt cold and fortified. The trial chambers felt mechanical and programmed. The Trail of Ruins feel human. Feels like a home once full of warmth and fondness. Each artifact we have encountered points to ordinary life rather than a grand catastrophe. The candles, the farming tools, the dyes, the music disc, the ceramic sherds were not merely objects of survival, but of identity. Perhaps this was a primitive civilization that then evolved to be the ancient city builders. Perhaps they were an entirely different culture. The people of Sundial were not just builders. They were innovators, travelers, farmers, and craftspeople who understood emotion deeply enough to preserve it in clay. Despite these traces, there are many answers we are devoid of. We can study their colors and reconstruct their pottery, but we cannot know how this community disappeared or who they eventually became. That story was not carved among the clay for us to interpret. Once again, the sun bestows its eyes on the edifice, continuing to rise and fall, as it did all those years ago with the people who once called it home.